Alina Reyes thought she had found her forever in George Dalton, the charming older man who promised her the world, but during their honeymoon cruise, a shocking discovery about George's hidden past turned love into rage, ending their dream voyage in a blood-soaked nightmare no one saw coming. Alina Reyes stood at the railing of the cruise ship Celestial Harmony, her heart swelling with the kind of happiness she had only seen in movies. The evening sun sank slowly into the Caribbean Sea, painting the waves in hues of gold and crimson. Her husband, George Dalton, a wealthy businessman in his mid-50s, was beside her, smiling as if he had conquered the world. They had married just 5 days ago, in an intimate ceremony, and this honeymoon cruise was his surprise gift to her. For Alina, it felt like a dream, one that proved her long search for love had finally found its ending. George had swept her off her feet from the start. They met on a travel website where he often posted pictures of his adventures around the world. His words were warm, his gestures thoughtful, and his promises constant. He told her he had been lonely since losing his wife years ago, and Alina, who had always believed in second chances, saw him as a man ready to love again. When he proposed after only a few months of video calls and visits, she accepted without hesitation. She admired his stability, his gentleness, and the way he seemed to adore her. On the ship, George treated Alina like royalty. He ordered room service breakfasts, surprised her with jewelry from the onboard boutique, and planned romantic dinners under the stars. The other passengers often complimented them, calling them the perfect couple. To Alina, it was the happiest she had ever been. She believed every smile, every word, and every promise he gave her. But beneath that perfect picture, cracks were already forming, small, silent ones that she had not yet noticed. It began with little things. George never let her touch his phone, always keeping it face down on the table. When the ship's photographer offered to take a picture of them, he declined sharply, saying he didn't like being photographed. He avoided talking about his family, saying they were complicated people who didn't approve of his marriage. Each time she asked about his work, his answers changed slightly. Once he said he ran an import business, another time he mentioned real estate. Alina laughed it off, thinking older men sometimes got forgetful, but a faint unease began to grow. One afternoon, while unpacking their luggage, she noticed something strange. George's suitcase contained 2 passports, one with his name and another with a different one. The photo on both looked similar, but the man in the second passport was younger, sharper, and his expression colder. She wanted to ask him about it but hesitated. What if it was just a mistake? What if it was none of her business? She convinced herself not to overthink, sliding the passport back where she found it. That night, as they stood on the upper deck watching the waves shimmer in the moonlight, Alina tried to shake off her discomfort. The soft sea breeze and the sound of laughter around her reminded her to stay present. But somewhere deep inside, an invisible shadow had begun to stir, one that whispered that something about her husband was not what it seemed. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the cabin windows, but Alina felt a strange heaviness in the air. George was already dressed, sipping coffee on the balcony, his phone in his hand. He ended a call quickly when she appeared, slipping the phone into his pocket with a quick, stiff smile. She told herself not to worry, yet the unease from the night before lingered. As they went down for breakfast, she noticed the way he avoided eye contact with some of the passengers, as though afraid of being recognized. During the morning stroll around the ship, Alina's thoughts replayed the discovery of the second passport. Curiosity began to gnaw at her. She wondered if George was hiding something deeper than a name change, perhaps a failed business, or a past he was embarrassed about. But the more she tried to rationalize, the more questions formed. Why did he use 2 identities? Why was he secretive about his past? Her instincts told her that the man she married was not entirely who he claimed to be. Later that afternoon, Alina decided to visit the ship's spa while George went to the casino. When she returned to their cabin, his laptop was open on the desk, a glowing screen filled with messages. She froze when she saw a chat window with a message from someone named Mark D. The words were short but sharp, a demand for money, mentioning that running away as another person won't fix what you owe. Alina's heart pounded. The message vanished before she could read more, and she quickly closed the laptop, afraid he might return any second. Dinner that night was quiet. George seemed distracted, tapping his fingers restlessly on the table. When Alina asked if everything was all right, he simply said he was tired. His face looked strained, and his voice carried a hint of irritation she hadn't heard before. He excused himself early, leaving her alone on the deck. She sat there, staring at the endless sea, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. The idea that her new husband could be hiding a criminal past began to take root in her mind. As the ship moved through the dark waters, Alina decided she could no longer ignore the signs. When she returned to the cabin, George was asleep. Quietly, she searched through his bag again, her hands trembling. Along with the passports, she found a folded document, a birth certificate. What she read next left her stunned. The name on it matched the younger photo from the second passport, but the gender listed was female. Alina's thoughts spiraled. It didn't make sense. Was it a mistake, a relative's document, or was her husband living an entirely fabricated life? She sat in silence, gripping the paper, unable to process the truth. If George wasn't who he claimed to be, what else had he lied about? The soft hum of the ship suddenly felt deafening. Alina looked over at the man sleeping peacefully beside her, realizing that the stranger in her bed might not just be hiding a secret, he might be hiding from something far more dangerous. Alina barely slept that night. Every sound, the creak of the ship, the faint footsteps in the hallway made her heart race. When morning came, she pretended everything was normal, hiding the document deep inside her bag. George was calm again, cheerful even, as if nothing had happened. He suggested they spend the day exploring the next port city together, and Alina forced a smile, agreeing while silently observing every move he made. Her mind replayed the birth certificate over and over, each thought darker than the last. As they walked through the crowded marketplace near the docks, Alina noticed how George avoided being photographed again. When a street vendor offered to take their picture for a souvenir, he stepped away quickly, pretending to check his watch. Something about the way he looked around, cautious, nervous, confirmed that he was afraid of being recognized. Alina began to study his mannerisms, realizing how carefully constructed his personality was. His laugh, his confidence, his stories, they all now felt rehearsed. Later that afternoon, they returned to the ship. George said he needed to take a call in private and left her by the pool. Alina waited, but curiosity took control. She followed him quietly down the hallway, stopping near the corner outside their cabin. Through the slightly open door, she saw him pacing, his voice low and urgent. She couldn't make out every word, but she caught fragments. They can't find out. I'm still paying, and the papers were destroyed. Her pulse quickened. The conversation ended abruptly, and she slipped away before he saw her. That night, a formal dinner was held in the ship's grand hall. Couples dressed elegantly, music floated through the air, and cameras flashed as guests danced under the chandelier. George appeared relaxed again, laughing with other travelers. But Alina could see the tension behind his smile. The more she watched him, the more she realized he was hiding something that went beyond money or identity. When he excused himself to use the restroom, she stayed seated, glancing at the phone he had left behind. Her curiosity won. She opened the screen with trembling hands and scrolled through his messages. The first few were harmless, but then she saw a string of emails linked to medical appointments and legal paperwork. Words like transition, surgery, and identity change appeared repeatedly. Alina froze. The pieces began to connect. The birth certificate, the second passport, the anxiety about being seen. Her husband wasn't just using another name. He had lived another life. The man she married had once been a woman. Shock coursed through her. The truth felt unreal, and her emotions collided. Confusion, betrayal, disbelief. She remembered how he had insisted on keeping their marriage private, how he avoided intimacy for days, claiming exhaustion. Everything suddenly made sense. She felt tricked, manipulated, and humiliated. When George returned, she couldn't look at him the same way. Behind his calm expression, she now saw deceit. That night, she lay awake beside him, her thoughts burning like fire. The honeymoon she once dreamed of had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape, and as the waves hit the side of the ship, one question kept echoing in her mind. What else had he been lying about? Alina spent the next morning in silence, her mind trapped between disbelief and anger. The sea outside was calm, but her thoughts stormed violently. She kept replaying everything she had learned. The second passport, the threatening messages, the birth certificate, and now the proof that George had transitioned years ago. She felt betrayed not by his past, but by the deception that surrounded it. He had built an entire identity on secrets, dragging her into a marriage that was never what it seemed. The man she thought she knew was a carefully constructed illusion. George, on the other hand, acted as though nothing was wrong. He brought her breakfast in bed, spoke about future travel plans, and even mentioned wanting to renew their vows someday. Every kind gesture now felt like a lie, and each smile reminded her of the truth she had uncovered. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held her back. What if he became violent? What if the man she married was capable of more than just deceit? That afternoon, the ship's captain announced a formal dinner for couples celebrating anniversaries and honeymoons. George insisted they attend, calling it a night they'd never forget. His words, though innocent, sent a chill down her spine. She agreed quietly, planning her next steps. She needed proof, something she could use once they reached land. When George left to buy her a new dress from the onboard boutique, Alina searched his belongings one last time. Hidden in the lining of his suitcase, she found a folder filled with documents, financial records, old photographs, and a letter addressed to Mr. Dalton. Inside was the truth she had feared. George had been married before, under his former identity. The name on the papers was female, the spouse listed as another man. There were also legal notices demanding repayment of large debts and an investigation. Reports suggesting he had fled the country years ago to avoid fraud charges. Everything suddenly became clear. The man who promised her love and security had built his life on lies and stolen trust. Alina's world shattered in silence. She felt trapped on that ship, surrounded by strangers and bound to a man she no longer knew. When George returned with the dress, she forced herself to smile, hiding her fear behind a calm mask. That evening, She stood before the mirror in the luxurious gown he had chosen. Her reflection looked beautiful but hollow. As George fastened a necklace around her neck, she felt a sharp sting of resentment. They dined under the soft glow of chandeliers, laughing couples around them. But beneath the polished surface, tension thickened between them. Alina could barely eat, her thoughts consumed by escape. Later, as they walked back to their cabin, the hallways felt darker, the air heavier. George's hand brushed hers, but she pulled away. He asked if something was wrong, but she said nothing. The silence between them deepened until it became unbearable. By the time they reached their room, Alina's heart was no longer filled with love, only fury and fear. And deep down, she knew that before this cruise ended, something irreversible was going to happen. That final night at sea felt endless. The cruise ship sailed smoothly through dark waters, but inside their cabin, a quiet tension simmered. Alina sat near the window, her eyes fixed on the ocean's horizon, her mind spiraling. The man sleeping behind her was no longer the loving husband she once believed in. He was a stranger who had stolen someone else's life. The documents she had found were still hidden in her bag, proof of everything he had concealed. Yet it wasn't only his lies that haunted her now. It was the fear that she had married someone capable of anything to protect his secret. George stirred, asking if she was all right. She replied softly that she couldn't sleep. He smiled faintly, but there was something distant in his eyes, as if he sensed her unease. He turned over and drifted back into slumber, while Alina's thoughts raced faster than the waves outside. Every lie, every moment of deceit replayed in her mind until anger began to overshadow fear. She thought about how he had taken her trust, how he had built their entire marriage on deception, and as that thought repeated, it began to twist into something darker, the feeling that justice had to come from her own hands. Sometime past midnight, Alina got up quietly and walked to the small kitchenette. The soft hum of the ship was the only sound around her. She opened a drawer, and her eyes fell on a silver fruit knife lying beside the tray. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, the cold metal pressing against her skin. She didn't know what she intended to do, only that she could no longer live trapped in a lie. Her breaths grew shallow, her heart heavy with fury and confusion. George woke suddenly, noticing her silhouette in the dim light. He sat up, his expression uncertain. He asked what she was doing, but she didn't respond. In that tense moment, the silence between them cracked open everything that had been buried. Every emotion she had repressed, betrayal, humiliation, anger, flooded through her. She stepped closer, her voice low but shaking, accusing him of destroying her trust. The words poured out like years of pain condensed into minutes. George tried to reach for her, his tone pleading, but she stepped back, tears streaking her face. The air between them grew thick with desperation. When he moved closer again, she reacted without thought, her hand tightening around the knife. The sound of the blade striking once cut through the stillness of the room, followed by his gasp. Time froze. The look in his eyes shifted from shock to sorrow as he fell, the silence returning heavier than before. Alina dropped the knife, trembling uncontrollably. Her mind couldn't grasp what had just happened. Outside, the waves kept moving as if nothing had changed, but inside, her life had shattered beyond repair. She sank to the floor, staring blankly, the reality of what she had done slowly sinking in. When the authorities found her hours later, she was still there, silent, cold, and staring into nothing. What began as a honeymoon built on love had ended in tragedy, born of secrets. The truth she had uncovered had destroyed them both, leaving behind a story that no one on that cruise would ever forget.